Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum's podcast series, Leading at the Intersection of Business and Law. In this episode, we're excited to be joined by Dr. Ian Holloway, Professor of Law at the University of Calgary. Dr. Holloway is going to talk to us about his career path into academia and the impressive curriculum that he designed. In this conversation, we're also going to dive into the access to justice crisis in Canada, and we'll examine the role that lawyers can play in helping society and businesses navigate the risk-on world that we're living in. Thank you for listening, and please stay tuned.
Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast. Today, our guest is Professor Ian Holloway, who's at the University of Calgary Law School. Ian has recently stepped down as the Dean of the University of Calgary, where he served from 2011 to 2024. And prior to that was at the University of Western, where he was the Dean of the Law School there from 2000 to 2011. Welcome, Dr. Holloway.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Ian, you've had a really fascinating career. We've known each other a number of years, and you've always been a big supporter of our program since we started in 2018. So nice to have an opportunity to interview you in more depth. So tell us about your career path. You were Canada's longest serving law school dean in your tenure over most of this century, right?
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. Tell us about your career path and what brought you to this conversation now.
Sure. It's a career path with, I will admit, little foresight. I kind of seem to stumble from one thing to another. I'm from New Brunswick. I grew up in the Maritimes. I went to Dalhousie University for both my undergraduate education in biology, and then the Dalhousie Law School. I began my career very conventionally. I practiced law with what for those times, the mid-1980s, was a big firm, the firm of McInnes Cooper, with which you're probably acquainted, a very prominent firm, a firm with which I'm proud still to be connected. And then something sad happened, but behind every dark cloud lies a silver lining. My mother, who raised me principally, died suddenly, and that kind of shook me up. And I thought to myself, gee, if I were run down by a bus tomorrow, is this all I'd want in life? Is being a partner in a big law firm all I'd want in life? And the answer to that was no. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but I knew that I thought I wanted something more than what I was doing. And so I moved to England. I'd done a lot of agency work, which was a bigger deal before the internet, I think, than it is now. So I'd done a lot of agency work for an English firm. So I moved to England briefly. And then I moved to the United States, where I did my LLM, my master's degree. And then I came back to Canada for a year, where I served as the law clerk to the Chief Justice of the Federal Court of Appeal. And then I moved to Australia to do my PhD. And while doing my PhD, a teaching job came up at the Australian National University, which I was lucky enough to get. And so that's where I began my teaching career. And in 1998, the dean, my dean at the time, a wonderful man, the late Michael Coper, appointed me his associate dean. So from 98 to 2000, I served as the associate dean, one of the associate deans at the ANU, and that led to my appointment as dean at Western. So I moved back to Canada in July of 2000, and I served there till the end of June of 2011, at which point I moved to Calgary. In between, over the years, I spent a period as a visiting professor at the National University of Singapore. I spent some time as a visiting scholar at Cambridge and at the University of Limerick in Ireland. I did some really interesting work for the Sultan of Oman, which was both exciting and fulfilling. But here I am now.
Fascinating. So what did you enjoy most about being a dean, and what did you enjoy least? No.
Well, what I enjoyed least was bureaucracy. Whatever you do as a dean, it's the wrong thing in someone's mind. And people ascribe all sorts of terrible motives to you. And and the bureaucratic systems, mean that people complaining and unhappy, people being unhappy, are on your plate all the time. And so if you're a sensitive person, as I am, that can wear on you. You really have to develop a thick skin. And so that's the part I like least. It's no fun having to develop a thick skin. But the part I liked most was the liberty of being the person who said, hey, what about this? What if we tried this? Let's give it a go. More often than not, there are reasons why you shouldn't try this. But it's that liberty of being the person to say, hey, let's give it a go. That's what kept me going for all those years.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and obviously something you're very good at, given the length of your tenure, right? Like there's a certain skill set in academia, and any kind of organizational structure, but academia has its own unique structures to be a dean, right? It's in some ways probably like being a managing partner of a law firm.
Yeah. I've often used that analogy with my managing partner friends, and sometimes when I want to be when I want to poke at them, I actually say it's harder than being a managing partner, because in a law firm, of course, there are big egos and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, there's a mutually agreed upon bottom line, and that is, are we making money? If we're making money, it's good. If we're not, it's bad.
Yeah.
But in a university, there's not even a mutually agreed upon bottom line. And so that makes, and, rightly so, we value academic freedom and people have tenure. And so you don't have a lot of sticks and you don't have many carrots, at least in a publicly funded system like we have in Canada. And so it is a challenge, trying to knit together enough consensus. And you of course you work for several different constituencies. The university, that's who signs your paycheck, is the board of governors and the president. But so there's the university, there are, of course, your faculty colleagues, there are the students, there are the alumni, there's the profession. And on any given issue, you will never get perfect alignment of all those constituencies. So you try to get as many lined up as you can, but you're not going to get them all lined up, and whatever you do, you're going to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. What a fascinating journey. So where we connected and curious to learn more about was, the University of Calgary's really, the law school is really focused on innovation. So that we had an immediate commonality, which led to you being involved with our programs over the years. And you called it the Calgary curriculum.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how that came into being under your tenure. Why did you choose innovation as such a key pillar of the program, and how that has been rolled out over time? Just give us the history.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not sure that I was conscious of this at the time, but the longer I go, the more I realize that the Calgary curriculum, or at least the impetus for asking the questions which ultimately led to the Calgary curriculum, stemmed from my own my dissatisfaction with my own legal education. See, the conventional, the model of the traditional model of legal education that we have in North America is predicated on a dichotomy of skills and theory. And the conventional wisdom is that you spend 3 years in law school learning theory, and then you spend a year in Canada anyway as an apprentice, as an articling student, learning practice. And at the end of those 4 years, and assuming you pass the bar examinations in their province, you're fully trained as a lawyer. But I came to believe that was a false dichotomy. Moreover, the business model of law firms, of legal practice, is changing. The very first time I appeared in the Court of Appeal of Nova Scotia on my own. One of the senior partners in the firm spent the whole day in court with me. He sat at the back, but during the breaks, he would give me pointers and critiques and encouragement. And it was wonderful. I didn't realize this at the time, but of course now I know he gave up a whole day of billings to spend with some kid who's trying to learn the ropes. Well, and thank God bless him. Peter McClellan is his name. God bless him for doing that. But our business model wouldn't permit that today. So I think that the structural basis upon which the traditional notion was founded no longer exists. At the same time, of course, we have a conflation of technology and the kind of technology we're using today and globalization. In globalization, it's an overused term. It's become hackneyed. It's become a curse word in some circles, but it's real. Just go to any grocery store and you can see how real globalization is. And what that conflation means is that the kinds of legal issues that people have, whether it's big companies or ordinary people have, are changing. They're becoming more complex. And the time pressures to solve them are changing as well. I'm not that old, but even when I started, most legal practice was done by writing letters. You'd write a letter and you get a few days breathing time and you get a response and so on and so forth. In fact, when I was an articling student, that's when our firm started to get fax machines, which was this incredible breakthrough, it seemed. I mean, how quaint that seems now. And so the time pressures to respond to these evolving legal questions changing as well. I sometimes say that when I started, the word jurisdiction used to be a comfort term for lawyers because it signaled when a problem was no longer your problem, but someone else's. Now, of course, jurisdiction is a feature, not a bug. And so every lawyer will have, no matter how big or what kind of a practice he or she may have, every lawyer will have clients whose legal interests transcend our boundaries. So the basis on which the old model, the model that educated all of us, was built, I thought no longer suited the needs of Canadians today. And so that's what led to the process. If we were going to design a system of legal education, what could we do? And the Calgary curriculum, as we adopted it, is not my curriculum. I mean, it's our curriculum. I appointed a working group. I made sure I was on it, but I also made sure that people who were on it who saw the world quite differently from me, so that no one could say, oh, well, Holloway's just trying to stack the deck here. We spent about a year, a really wonderful year, I have to say, just, asking ourselves, okay, if we had a blank sheet of paper, what would we do here? And we engaged with colleagues from the medical school. We engaged with colleagues, with brain scientists who understand how humans actually learn, how adult humans actually learn and retain. And over time, that led us to develop what today we call in shorthand the Calgary curriculum. And the simplest version of the Calgary curriculum is that it does two things. It breaks down the traditional dichotomy between theory and skills. It's a false dichotomy. I say that a lawyer with theory but no skill is useless, and a lawyer with skill but no theory is just a malpractice case waiting to happen. So it does that, and it also teaches in a way that better aligns with how adults learn and retain. What brain science tells us, and it's unequivocal, is that the least effective way to teach is to get someone to plunk their bottom down on a seat for 3 hours a week for 13 weeks, and then to give them 100% go for broke examination. In other words, the way law school is traditionally done. That has no pedagogical value whatever. I sometimes used to say that lawyers in Canada learn despite how they're taught rather than because of how they're taught. And so what we've done in the Calgary curriculum is to break down the dichotomy between theory and skills, and so incorporate skills in all of our courses, and also to include greater intensity of learning, because that brain science teaches us is a key to retention and adult learning. And we also, partly because of the change in business model that I talked about earlier, introduced a bunch of courses that you don't normally see in law school curriculum. Things like leadership for lawyers, things like project management, things like marketing and client development, things like crisis communications, and I could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
So a whole bunch of courses that you don't normally see in law school curriculum. And those two things together, the structural change together with the content additions, I believe, single this out as Canada's most innovative law school.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Question about, I've actually every year, or the last couple, well, I say every year, the last 2 or 3 years, I've been a guest lecturer on one of those courses for in-house lawyers.
Yeah.
By a friend of mine, Lynn
Lynn
Charbonneau.
Charbonneau, yeah.
You're
With whom
right.
I was a law clerk. We were law clerks.
Oh, that's
together.
right. I remember that. Yeah. I think you reconnected at one of our conferences.
Yeah, that's right. We did. Yeah.
Pre-pandemic. So it's interesting, and I know she brought a lot of enthusiasm and brings a lot of enthusiasm to teaching that course, and has had an interesting and diverse career herself as well,
Yeah.
both in private practice and in-house. In the curriculum, did you have a lot of, if you talk about marketing, would you be bringing in people from, say, the Faculty of Commerce at the university, or people who are not in the not necessarily from the profession?
Oh, yeah. No, very much. And so the marketing and client development course is taught by someone who has a law degree, but he actually works as a headhunter, as an executive search consultant. And he brings in CEOs to help him, deliver the course. And in fact, the course culminates in the students actually having to do pitches for legal work for a panel of CEOs. Which kind of neat.
Yeah.
Another one of our courses is called Business Skills for Lawyers. And by design, it's actually not taught by lawyers, it's taught by business people. Because one of the things that we want to do in that course is to introduce students to the idea of looking at legal issues through the eyes of clients, not the eyes of lawyers. And that's because it's a very different thing, very different skill. So we use lots of people who aren't lawyers, because of course that's why we exist. We exist as lawyers to serve others, and to do that we need to understand how others think and what they need and how they react to what we say.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't exist in a vacuum, right? And that's whether you're in private practice or whether you're in-house counsel.
Absolutely.
You'll be working cross-functionally. And one of the interesting things when you look at design applied to the legal ecosystem and new ways of doing things is to work, cross-departmentally, cross-functionally, bring in different perspectives, different expertise, and these labs that you see all over the place. Well, not all over the place. Often, they bring in all sorts of people.
Yeah.
So, and you're absolutely right at the baseline, whether or not you're in a design lab at somewhere or just working in a company as an in-house lawyer, you're going to have to work with marketing. You're going to have to work with sales. You're going to have to, so that's how the real world is.
Absolutely. And as I said earlier, that's partly why, when we were designing the Calgary curriculum, we worked with colleagues from the medical school and and with neuroscience and scientists, people who understand how the brain works, precisely for that reason.
Yeah, fascinating.
It's very easy for lawyers. We reflexively sort of, default to like an inside baseball mode, and that's wrong. The best lawyers are sometimes you have to talk inside baseball, but not all the time. Ultimately, you have to be able to talk to the end user of our services, and the best lawyers are ones who can do that.
Absolutely, yeah, and see where they fit into the puzzle. So, are there any other features of the Calgary curriculum that you found the most interesting or played out in the most unexpected ways?
Well, actually, thank you for asking that. People often say to me, what part of the Calgary curriculum am I most proud of? And the answer is that I'm proud of it all. But what I'm most proud of is the fact that we got ourselves culturally, organizationally, into this place where we could say, well, let's give it a go. We know we're going to make mistakes. We know there are going to be bumps on the road, but let's try anyway. It's that fear of failure that so often acts as a paralyzing force on organizational development, organizational change. And blessedly, we've been able to overcome that at Calgary. That's what I'm most proud of all. And the courage we had together, because we did it together, to adopt the Calgary curriculum, enabled us to do a whole bunch of other things as well too. We started a few years ago a family law incubator, which was looking at how much technology could be used to simplify, streamline, and cheapen, in the sense of making less expensive, family law services. In the end, the incubator didn't quite work out, but we tried it and we learned from it. And so I don't view that as I wish it had worked out, but I don't view it as a failure at all. I mean, that's what entrepreneurs do, is you try, what's the expression? Fail early, fail often. That's how you learn.
Fail fast.
It's what gave us the courage, so to speak, to develop what is Canada's first, and I think still only, dual degree program with a law school in India. Right now, these days, Canada and India are going bumps in the road in terms of our relations. But the fact is that India is the largest common law jurisdiction in the world. It has the largest English-speaking population in the world. And there are more millionaires in India than there are people in Canada. And so, and given our demographics in this country, it just seems crazy that, the academy hasn't paid closer attention to India. And so we did. It's what gave us the wherewithal to start a program to assist foreign trained lawyers who want to get qualified in Canada. And it gave us the principles to design that in a way that suits their lives. We offer the classes in the evenings because many of these people are earning to try to support their families during the day. We have a dedicated career services officer who, in addition to the career services stuff, provides a lot of cultural support and so on. So the Calgary curriculum really gave us a leg up to innovate in a whole bunch of other ways. Now, a question that I'm often also asked is, well, is it working? How do you know if it's working? And what I can say to you is this, is that when we had adopted it, in fact, at the faculty meeting where we had the vote on adopting it, I said to my colleagues at the time, look, once we go through a full cycle, from soup to nuts, class is admitted under the Calgary curriculum and goes through and graduates, then we will retain an external consultant to do a review of it. And I wanted to make sure it was external. So no one could say that we were trying to massage the data or anything like that. So we hired someone, and she gave us a great report and said, look, this is going well. Maybe you could improve this. This isn't working quite the way you thought it was. This is better than you thought it was. So that's good. But I also measure it in both inputs and outputs. If you look at application numbers to Canadian law schools over the past, pick the figure, 5, 6, 7 years, it's been largely flat. The pandemic was a bit of a bump, of course, but it's been largely flat, except at one school where the application numbers have gone up by 30%. And that's despite all the bad press that Alberta gets in other parts of the country. And in fact, we, along with Dalhousie, get more of our students from out of province than any other law school in the country. And then you look at in other words, people who have choice are choosing to come here for the Calgary curriculum. And then you look at the back end, and our placement rate continues to be the highest in the country. Even when oil was at 8, to use the Alberta metaphor, our students were all still getting jobs.
Yeah,
so
fascinating.
So the profession likes what it sees.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right. So that's converting into opportunities, and ultimately, I think that's a question about higher education in general that seems to have been happening the last 5 or 7 years is, people saying, well, why bother go to university even in the first place? All right, which I would disagree personally, but it's been a while since I was in university. So I think that's interesting, is turning into results, and is that growth rate was higher because people see Calgary curriculum as, a practical place to do your law degree and beyond, perhaps, that will equip you for the sort of real world that you're going to live in sooner than you think when you start law school, right?
Exactly.
So Ian, I want to talk to you about a couple more things, 2 strands, because one is, the way we look at things in the forum is we look at business to business law and then we look at business to consumer law. Business to business law, so big law, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
We live in, I'm calling a risk on world. You just turn on the news, if you have any kind of, the risks that an in-house lawyer or general counsel need to be thinking about in any kind of organization they're working in have risen dramatically. And I think we are living through a fairly dynamic, would be an understatement, decade. And frankly, I don't see it really changing, to be quite honest. At least that's my view. So the theory from there is that actually, in fact, lawyers helping organizations navigate these risks in intelligent, effective, impactful ways are more valuable than ever. Except the role of lawyers, needs to evolve to support that way of thinking, that omniscience that they have in organizations, that experience, that judgment, all those sort of components. Tell us what you think the sort of modern in-house lawyer or someone in private practice advising organizations navigating this risk-on world, what tenets do they need to have, or areas in their toolkit, tools in their toolkit that they need to really lean on and learn to add that value, that necessary value to succeed?
I think that one of the things that through courses like business skills for lawyers and the in-house course in which you teach are trying to do is to introduce students to the idea that oftentimes in business, close enough is good enough.
Yeah.
Given the time pressures, given the urgency of so many problems, close enough is good enough. And that involves determining whether or not something's close enough, involves the ability to balance risk. In other words, rather than sort of looking for the right answer is how do we balance risks here? How do we tailor our advice to match what the CEO in the case of a business, or the managing partner in the case of a law firm, what she or he wants? And that can be surprisingly challenging for if you think about the typical law student. I mean, they're type A people, so the work ethic isn't an issue. They work very hard, but they're also super high achievers, right? And they're used to being right all the time, or a significant amount of the time. And we say, well, we don't care about whether you're right. We care if are you close enough in a high intensity, urgent setting. Because what's happening in the daytime in Singapore, it's the middle of the night here, and well, okay, we can talk about work-life balance, but we still need someone up grinding away in the middle of the night because they need it today in Singapore. Those are challenging skills. Now, if you were to ask me, can 3 years in a law school equip you with everything you need to know to be the general counsel for a multinational corporation? Of course, the answer is no. But what we believe is that we can introduce the professional habits that will equip someone as they move up the professional ladder, as they get more and more senior, to train themselves to think in the way and to act in the way and respond in the way that the world needs them to do today. And so, here's another example of that, which links back to the Calgary curriculum. When we teach our legal writing and research course to first-year students, of course, we're, among other things, trying to teach the nuts and bolts of proper legal citation and legal writing conventions and so on. But typically what we do in that course is we give the students novel issues for which there is no legal answer yet, and get them to ponder on that. One example is, we've legalized cannabis in this country, but there's an open question that we don't know the answer to yet, and that is, who regulates cannabis on First Nations reserve? Is it the government of Canada, or is it the First Nations themselves? Or does it depend upon the particular treaty arrangements? And there are some chiefs in this country who say, we regulate, it's none of your business, we decide. We can still ban it if we wish it, or we can make 15 the age of consumption if we wish. And at some point, a case will make its way to the Supreme Court of Canada, and we'll know the answer, the legal answer, but we don't know yet. And so we actually gave the students this as their first year problem. So try to figure this out, try to sort it out. And that is a tremendously powerful learning learning situation for students who are accustomed to looking for the right answer. I can research long enough and I'll find the right answer somewhere. And here there is no right answer yet. What do you think and why? And which
Yeah.
will probably, well, in other words, what we're saying to students is predict judicial behavior.
Yes.
That's a very important skill.
Yeah.
And that's so to go back to your question, Andrew, that I think is one of the key ones, is to be able to predict events that haven't yet happened and to engage in a cost benefit analysis, to
Mhm.
balance risk, and to do so in situations of tremendous urgency.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of and no right answer, right?
And the right
It's
answer,
yeah, that's the times we're living in. I mean, I don't think anyone could have predicted what the last 5 years have looked like, and no
no,
one
you
can really
sure,
predict.
yeah,
But if you're, advising an organization, seeing around those corners, you look at things like AI, look at geopolitics, you look at the
mm,
outcomes of the pandemic, onshoring, right? It's just
yeah,
changing. Everything's changing, and
yeah,
that way of thinking, I think, is really critical for organizations and really valuable. And those from the profession who are able to sort of support that, I think will do very well. And like you said, that mindset of balancing risk and opportunity, right?
mm,
I'm an entrepreneur, so we're always looking at opportunity and trying to
mm,
navigate as the business goes on and grows and faces changes itself. But the risk part you need to be aware of too. Okay, so that's like the big law perspective. I'm interested in the consumer law. So you mentioned the family law lab,
mm,
which struck me as quite interesting. First of all, the fact that you were able to run it as an experiment, and perhaps it didn't turn out as maybe you'd hoped. But if you look at any major company, technology company, I was with Bloomberg for 7 years, and I remember I was working on a new business which didn't actually go anywhere. I spent 2 years of my life doing all this work, and they said, actually, it's not going to work.
yeah, we changed our mind.
But hey, no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
We're going to make you do something else interesting.
mm,
So go tackle this problem, because we
yeah,
know how you think and tackle things. So we'll move it to there. So I think that's that's how entrepreneurial successful businesses work. You look at companies like Google, they make a big deal about things, and then they bin things after a year, and it goes away after all the
mm,
press releases, etc. So I think that's just a brave way of thinking, to say it's okay, it didn't work. But without digressing too much, we do have an access to justice crisis. There was an article in the Globe Weekend a few weeks ago, which I thought was an excellent
mm,
article. And some of the stats that they're pointing to in Canada relative to other jurisdictions were quite surprising. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you have the end user, the consumer, loses. This gap that's widening, and access to justice, if you can pay for it, is there.
yeah,
If both sides can pay for it, then they both get a fair shot at it. Oftentimes not the case, but then a lot of people don't even bother, and then they don't actually get to to access anything, right? They don't get to exercise their rights. What, in your view, needs to change for us to better enable access to justice for not companies or not the wealthy, but
sure.
people who want to exercise their rights?
Yeah, well, I mean, in 2 words, cost and complexity, and of course the two are related. And we have the wherewithal to do that. I mean, AI is sort of evolving at such a tremendous clip that we
Yeah.
need to, get a handle on it, but we also need to acknowledge what a powerful tool it can be to make things simpler for ordinary folk. And by the way, and if we don't as a profession, then other
Yeah.
professions will. And so that's something else we need to, we need to have in the back of our minds. This is where I think that the lawyer as leader is critically important. But when we started our course on leadership for lawyers, people said, "Oh, it's for people going to large law firms," and I said, "No, it's for anyone who wants to, but particularly important for lawyers who are going to work in sole practices or smaller firms, lawyers who are going to serve ordinary people." Because if you think about the context of when we, as an ordinary person, when we hire a lawyer, it's because our life has come to an end. We've been charged with a crime, or our marriage is broken down, or we've been dismissed from our job, or we think, I'm the guy in the garage. Like I'm Steve. I'm the next Steve Jobs. In all of those contexts, what the client, what the individual really needs is not so much legal information. I mean, I guess they need legal
Mhm.
information, but they need leadership skills, someone to help lead them to a better place.
Mhm.
And so the lawyer as leader, I think, is absolutely critical if we are going to remain relevant to the lives of ordinary Canadians.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. You sort of think maybe people adrift in life rafts of their lives, so to
Mhm.
speak, right? And
Yeah,
and usually when you need to get a lawyer, it's something, I mean, not all the time, but as a
it's something bad.
as something bad's happened,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's when you need to call a lawyer. But what you have is this long sort of process where you can't access justice unless you have deep pockets. You have misincentivized profession in many cases, which is protective of itself. And that doesn't lead to very many positive outcomes. So, and it's interesting too, as you see in Canada, for example, in British Columbia, although there's an election,
Mm.
I think it's tomorrow or today. I mean, I should know that, being a British Columbian
Hmm.
originally. But you have a fairly activist premier who was, for, and I may have had the incorrect term there, excuse me, it's the end of the day, but he's had an activist agenda, right? With ICBC, the public
Yep,
insurer, he
yep,
changed things. Now he's looking at taking apart the Law
that's
Society,
right. Yeah.
restructuring it. They've had the Innovation Sandbox in BC. It's interesting because you can see on both sides of the equation. I mean, EB's organizing force would be, well, I want to enable access to justice for more people in my province that I'm the
Mm.
premier of this week. But the bar often thinks differently, right? And another thing that's interesting, actually, what I notice as someone who's sort of looking at this in the whole, is actually those changes that they made at ICBC, which about 5 years ago, where they capped the payouts, that forced the personal injury bar to rethink what they're doing,
Mm.
right? They said, well, we're good at contingency, we're comfortable with risk. Personal injury, we were doing a
Mm.
webinar on personal injury law earlier today. We're comfortable with risk. And there's other practice areas we can go into that we think, like estate litigation, for
Yeah, sure.
example, right? And it's interesting if you look at that kind of as a petri dish, is the regulation forced innovation. So you have to change if you still want to practice law. You've got to take this set of skills and take it somewhere else and learn something else instead of being a personal injury lawyer. So you have an activist agenda there from a provincial leader. Do you see there being like a turning point? Do you see AI being a real catalyst? Or when, we've been talking about this for a number of years, of course, in our discussions, but do
Yeah.
we see something as that tipping point when people say, this process this just doesn't make sense and we're not getting the outcomes we need. Technology can do this, and the profession's process itself largely out of jobs.
Well, if you look at the sort of the millennium of common law history, there haven't been that many tipping points, at least tipping points that we were conscious of at the time. What there have been periods of evolution which have existed at various speeds of various rates of acceleration or not. So I'm not sure that, we're at the state where the world's all of a sudden going to come to an end in that sense of the expression, tipping point. But what I do believe is that we're asking ourselves, we collectively as lawyers are asking ourselves the wrong question. We're thinking, okay, what good for us surely is good for society, because we
Mhm.
have been key to the free and democratic society that Canada is today.
Yeah.
That's accurate historically.
Yeah.
But I think the question we need to ask going forward is, how can we be relevant to Canada as it's changing and evolving and will continue to evolve in the years to come? If you think about it this way, Andrew, the legal profession as it is now is, of course, very different from what it was in the Middle Ages. Even though outwardly, I mean, we still wear gowns which are not dissimilar and to what they used to wear, and we use many of the same words and forms and so on. But our profession has been able to evolve from serving a society that was feudal and agricultural,
Mhm.
agrarian, feudal and agrarian, to a society that was kind of proto-constitutional, to a society that was revolutionary, to a society that was industrial, and now to a society that's post-industrial. And
Mhm.
we've been able to do that by sort of constantly being willing and open to recalibrate our professional sites.
Mhm.
And that's what we need to do today. The hitch is that we need to do it much more quickly
Yeah.
than they did it then. From the Black Death to the Wars of the Roses, which was an important period in terms of legal and constitutional and structural evolution, was a century or more, a century and a half. You know, from the first time you and I heard the expression chat GPT to today was like 14 months.
Yeah.
So the pressure is on. And so that's what worries me about the way in which law societies respond to initiatives like Premier EVs. And I'm not taking a
Yeah.
side one way or the other, but we just seem so defensive. We seem so grounded in the 19th and 20th centuries rather than being grounded in the 21st. Now, maybe we'd end up in the same position, and that is concluding that, the EB's proposed reforms are wrong, incorrect, but at least we could frame the argument in a way that speaks to the relevance going forward rather than relevance going backwards. I think
Yeah.
I sometimes put it this way. I think that we tend to focus on, we don't use these words necessarily, but we focus on stopping on tradition in substance, even though we have change in form. Whereas I think the actual way we should be doing it is the other way around.
Mhm.
And that is change in substance, but tradition in form. Tradition in form
Mhm.
is important. I'm a great believer in tradition.
Mhm.
I think it's a good thing that lawyers still wear gowns and
Mhm.
bow and you use a level of politeness that we don't usually see much in day-to-day society. I think that's of continuing relevance. But I think the substance has to change, and it has to change quickly.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well, it's just an interesting, there's no simple answer.
Yeah.
And Harold Macmillan events, dear boy, events will
That's right.
determine much of it anyway.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yeah,
have to
regardless
see.
of what we think.
Well, regardless of what you think. So
Well,
I,
and that
yeah.
it's true, isn't it, Andrew? I mean, if you think about it, like in theory, law can only be practiced by, barristers and solicitors who are licensed. But
Yeah.
the reality is that a lot of law is practiced by HR departments and by real estate agents and by private investigating firms and so on and so forth. And if we don't keep our wits about us collectively, that will just continue to be chipped away at, and we'll find
Yeah.
ourselves with like a lump.
That's right. Yeah. So there is and it's interesting when you look at AI, for example, right? Like, how firms embrace it, right? This is a question to a business model to say, if you're the client and you say, well, AI can do this, why should I pay an associate X or someone, to review this? I could do it in my chat GPT. That poses a really fundamental question to the structure. Now, then you get a question of what's the value, right? Again, the value for the right advice. I always remember I was interviewing a private equity from a major U.S. private equity fund in a fireside chat in New York last year, and he was talking about a multi-$100 million investment that they made, and he said, the legal fees and that kind of thing, we just want them to get it right. The fees don't matter. I mean, a percentage of the overall transaction, it may sound like a lot, but it's not. But we want to make sure that they're right and nothing goes wrong, and that's what matters. But that's an interesting kind of way of thinking about it. That value is absolutely, we need to have this belt and braces to be right, and the money doesn't matter now. But if you're applying that to everything, then it doesn't quite sort of match up across the board, right? And that, I think, is a struggle, because I think, you notice it, it just depends, right?
Well, and another thing you and I have talked about in the past, and I know you've talked about it with others as well, and that is the billable hour model. My gosh, it's enduring, isn't it? I mean, we just can't get rid of it, no matter how hard we try. But to me, it just seems crazier and crazier. So, for example, that hedge fund guy you were talking with, not only does he want it right, but he wants it right quickly, right? Because because there's a lot of risk a lot of urgent risk at play here. And so surely I think to myself, someone who can provide the best cost benefit analysis, the best risk balancing analysis in 10 minutes is more valuable than someone who does it in 10 hours or
That's
100
right.
hours.
That's right.
But the incentives that we have built into our business model of the regular practice of law is all about how much time I spend rather than how quickly I can get you the answer that is the right answer for you, given your risk tolerance and so on and so forth.
That's right. Sort of bet the company stuff.
Yeah.
Right. It's existential decisions. And how do you value that? Well, that is, that's a really fundamental question about the billable hour. And the easiest thing is to still bill hours, I suppose. And it looks like a lot of law firms are having no problem doing that at the top end. So Ian, I know we're getting towards an hour. So I want to ask you one final question. Now you've wrapped up your post as dean, the Faculty of Law at the University of Calgary. What do you intend on doing next?
Well, that's a good question, and that's maybe the one question where I'm not sure I have a satisfactory answer. I like teaching a lot, and I've taught throughout as dean.
Yeah.
I'm not the only law dean in Canada to teach, but it's not the norm. But it gives me a great deal of pleasure. So, doing more of that excites me. And at one point, before I got into this gig, I used to be quite a prolific scholar, and so I've got a number of ideas. And so, seeing whether I could revive my scholarly output, that seems a challenge as well too. But I know myself well enough to know that I've really come to like, the big picture, strategic, hey, what about this aspect of life? And so I do worry, if I'm completely candid with you, I do worry about feeling a bit of a professional void in my life, but I don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah, it's being designed as you go.
Well, I'm not sure maybe it should be being designed, but I'm not
Sometimes
sure.
sometimes these things are at work in a latent way you don't even know.
Well, without knowing that's exactly
yeah.
That and buying lottery tickets.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I'm sure it will be interesting no matter what. And we'd love to have you back on the podcast and in our events in the future. And it's been a delight to catch up with you.
Listen, I've said this to you privately, but I'll say it publicly for the purposes of this podcast, and that is that few things given me as much pleasure as getting close to you and through you to the forums. We that's been a real marquee part of what we've done at the University of Calgary, and so I've loved our partnership every step of the way, and I hope that I trust that institutionally it will continue, I hope for my own sake that personally it will as well.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is, and as you noted, we do have a partnership between the two organizations. You're our academic partner, and we're very appreciative of all the support as well. So, fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining us, Ian. Looking forward to our continued conversations. I always enjoy them.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast. Stay tuned on our website for the next edition. You can listen to us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in on liforum.co/podcasts.